Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. I'd like to welcome back onto the show veteran UFO researcher David Cayton. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now then, last time you were on, we spoke about your unfortunate heart attacks, three in a row. How are you recovering from that at the moment?
Yeah, pretty well, thank you. Yes, it was March the 8th last year, and then in the first 45 minutes I had 3 cardiac arrests. So thanks to the North West Ambulance Service and Manchester Royal Infirmary, where I was on a trolley waiting to have a stent put in to unblock the blocked artery, they jumped me again, and I'm here to tell the tale and participate in what we're doing.
Right.
Now, that, and be with my family, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, it sort of obviously was a setback for some of the things you were looking into. You were looking into the mysterious seal mutilation incidents where these seals were turning up with bizarre spiral cuts on their body, and it is still unexplained, and we are going to cover that in another show. And also animal mutilation cases. Tell us about the UFO Truth Conference in Holmfirth, September the 19th, 2015.
Suddenly I'm being presented with a
Let's have a look at it then, David.
An award for survival.
Which is a chunk of glass.
Yep, that's it.
Very good.
Which is very nicely done.
So read out what it says.
It says, UFO Truth magazine proudly presents David Cayton, UK, with a UK award for services to British ufology. So I was really thrilled to bits to get this. I mean, it was a complete surprise. Right.
So all right, we'll put it there.
Yeah.
All right. I hope it doesn't fall over. Right. All right. Great. Well done. Congratulations. So well
nice.
Deserved, I think.
Yes, it was a very nice, acknowledgement of my efforts for 20 odd years. So
right, and we'll come on to that because David and I have been looking into another horse mutilation case. Now, you may remember back in 2010, we made a film called Silent Killers in Sussex, which followed the tragic mutilation of a horse called Rascal in East Sussex. Was it, David?
Yes.
Since then, there's been probably at least half a dozen, if not more, maybe double figures, horse mutilation cases like that one in the UK. Do you want to name some of the areas, David?
Yeah, well, 2012, there seemed to be a spate of them a bit. So we're working from south to north. There was one in Cornwall, across the Bristol Channel in Carmarthenshire, and West Wales, in Pembrokeshire area, and then up in Scotland. I think that's it. I think
right. But
yes,
but we seem to have had a spate of attacks in the latter part of 2015. Now there are 5 cases that we know of. There may be more. 2 in Scotland, 1 in August, 1 in October, we believe. But there were 3 in Leicestershire.
Yes.
The first taking place, I think, on the 7th of September, 2015, in Leicestershire, and then another one followed about a fortnight after that. And when we think there might be a third one, but we haven't got that corroborated, have we?
Not yet. No.
We think the third one may be either before the first one. We're not sure, right? But there's definitely 2.
And they were just 2 miles apart.
2 miles apart. One on the 7th of September, one a couple of weeks later, and we actually went to the second one. So we filmed there. David took some high-definition images of the second case, which didn't have as many of the classic injuries, but some of them on the second horse. So let's talk about the first horse, David, Honey, from a place called Cayton in Leicestershire. Now, I found out about this case because somebody emailed me a story from the Leicester Mercury, I think it's called.
Leicester Mercury,
I then went on Facebook to try and track down the owner of the horse, which I managed to do, and then somebody passed the phone number on, so I telephoned the owner, and then I had several lengthy discussions with the horse owner. This is Claire Watts. We're going to discuss some very intriguing elements of this case, David, because it sort of had some twists and turns in it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's some of the classic injuries, and I've made a short documentary which features the horse owner Claire, because she very kindly allowed us into the field 2 weeks after her horse was mutilated. We went down to film the second mutilated horse, and we interviewed Claire in the field where her horse turned up.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to screen a short documentary that I've made following our investigation into this case. The story starts with media reports published on Tuesday the 8th of September of a barbaric blade attack on a horse in Cayton, Leicestershire. The reports claimed the incident is believed to have happened sometime between 6:15 p.m. on Sunday the 6th and 10:30 a.m. on Monday the 7th of September. The mainstream articles did not give particularly detailed descriptions of the injuries, stating it was done with a very sharp implement of some sort. The horse's right ear and some of the right side of her face was cut off. After studying the articles, it looked like a classic animal mutilation case, exhibiting some of the typical characteristics we have seen many times. I put some feelers out on social media to try and make contact with the horse owner, which I was able to do. I managed to make telephone contact with the owner on Wednesday the 9th of September, just 2 days after the attack. Since this date, I have been in regular contact with her by email and by phone, and have received a lot of information as events have transpired. There are two broad aspects to the story I want to cover. Firstly, the physical and circumstantial evidence, which point to something very unusual and closely match previous unexplained animal mutilation cases. Secondly, what seems to be blatant attempts by authorities to cover up detailed information about the injuries from the horse owner. The owner is someone with 20 years' experience in handling horses, who has between 60 and 70 horses at any one time.
I'm a McTimoney-Corley spinal therapist, so I'm an associate member of the McTimoney-Corley Association. So I'm a spinal therapist for both animals, including horses and dogs, such like, as well as humans. So I work alongside or for a lot of vets within the area to obviously, help with recovery process and things with horses and dogs that have, back injuries or just for maintenance work really. But I've owned horses all my life. I've done everything from sort of teaching, competing, riding, we sort of supply horses for the riding for disabled. We supply horses for film work. We have horses at the minute in Poldark and Jamaica Inn,
right.
BBC dramas. So obviously I've got quite extensive knowledge with regard to equines particularly.
Right, including sick and injured horses.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, at any one time I could be around nearly 100 horses. So obviously in that sort of capacity, you're going to come across a lot of sick and injured horses, and that's why I find this so difficult to understand, because it's something I've never seen before.
It's important to describe the sequence of events in date order to illustrate just how information was handled by the various authorities. Up to today, the 17th of November 2015, the horse owner still has not been given a copy of the post-mortem report, which we know was produced on the 8th of September and given to the RSPCA the same day. In the early hours of Monday the 7th of September, the horse mutilation occurred in a fairly secluded field in Cayton, Leicestershire. There were 3 other horses in the field which were untouched, but clearly perturbed when the owner discovered the dead horse that morning. The horse was found just after 9:30 in the morning. At this time, Claire could move all the legs, so rigor mortis hadn't fully set in. She concluded it's got to have happened in the early hours of the morning, because everything was still pliable. The first thing she did was ring the RSPCA, because she does a lot of work with the guy that covers that area, just in case anything else had been reported that morning. She then rang a very good friend who was a veterinary surgeon and sent her pictures which she took on her phone. The veterinary surgeon said it's her professional opinion that it had been done with a very sharp implement. She also said that she could not get her head around it, because she has looked and looked at the pictures, and the thing that is driving her mad is the lack of blood. She said the only explanation she could think of was if there was a strangulation of the gut, i.e. a bad colic. But if this was the case, Claire couldn't understand how there was still no blood when the horse was eventually moved. The injuries or procedures on the horse included a jaw strip, an extremely clean 5 to 6 inch diameter incision resulting in the removal of the ear, excision of the horse's chestnuts, which are small lumps on horses' legs. Hair had been cut and moved in tiny segments. The anus and vulva were badly swollen. There were small lacerations on the stomach, and the teats underneath where the milk bag would be almost looked like they'd been cut off. There were very tiny lacerations under the tail. The hair on the right side of the animal on which it was laying was laying the wrong way and ruffled, indicating the horse had been dragged. However, there were no drag marks on the ground anywhere near the horse, only drag marks some distance away in the middle of the field. There was no blood anywhere around the horse and nowhere in the field, which was searched vigorously by about 10 people. When the horse was eventually taken into the lorry, it was dragged 10 to 15 feet, but there was still no sign of any blood. Note, as in most mutilation cases, the items that were excised could not be found anywhere at the scene. After speaking to her veterinary surgeon friend, Claire then phoned the police. The police came out and straight away sent for a forensic team. The forensics woman took a sample of blood and cut a piece of hair off. The RSPCA didn't come out to see the horse, which Claire was quite shocked about. The RSPCA man said on the phone that because the police were dealing with it, they would just leave it in their hands. Later, Claire got a phone call from the RSPCA informing her that they were going to pay for a post-mortem to be carried out. By 3 o'clock, when the forensic woman was there, the legs had seized and rigor mortis set in. Claire assumed from this that the attack must have taken place in the early hours of the morning.
My partner discovered her,
Right.
And then he obviously rang me. He didn't realise what had actually gone on, other than the fact that, you know, she was in fact dead. He rang me straight away because it was so odd, and I came straight down. And the other 3 horses were in the very, very top part of the field, wouldn't come down to the horse to honey at all, which, in our opinion of having horses pass away and stuff in herds, they do generally come over, have a sniff, will stay relatively close by, and then go off and graze happily. That particular day, even the police said, you know, they were quite sort of unsettled. They weren't grazing a lot. They were sort of standing at the top end of the field, out of the way, sort of watching, looking, but not coming over. My initial reaction as I approached it and got closer was that the horse had obviously had some form of laceration wound, i.e. from a very sharp object, such as a knife or scalpel or something similar. You know, having dissected animals, you know, for study, etc. And it was very hard to justify what I was seeing. Yeah, this is where the body of the horse, this is where we found Honey. Her bottom was up that end and her head was down here. Right. But the day that it happened, there was very little blood, apart from a very small darkened circle around her head. But since that, we've got this dark patch left in the field now, which, as you can see, we can't get rid of, and there isn't any other horses around anymore. So consequently, it just seems a bit, a bit absurd that that's like it is. There was three absolute horse indentations, including, like, you could literally see the 4 legs, the tail, the head. They were absolute imprints of the horse up there. Yes. But then there's nothing at all from that area that brings you down to here, i.e. other footprints, skid marks, racing around or anything like that. Right, and this is where the head was. And then just to the right of where I'm pointing the camera is where the back end of the horse was. Yes. And as we can see, okay, it's a few weeks ago now, but there's no traces of any blood at this point in time. Nothing at all. And there wasn't at the time. There was very, very little blood, as you can see from the photographs that we took. There was a bit of blood round the back of her hair, a tiny bit on her forelock, but nothing anywhere else.
So David is just standing next to where the horse was lying when it was discovered, and we can see there's a dark patch of earth there, and this is where the horse's head was, with its body coming along to the right, just as the picture is there. But what Claire has said is that this patch here, you've said you can't get rid of it. You think there might be some sort of scorching in that area.
Yeah, absolutely.
Or some chemical perhaps has killed the grass.
Something.
Might be a chemical or something.
Yeah. Just seems to be going black as opposed to being washed away.
At about 5:30 p.m, the horse was taken to be post-mortemed by a good friend of Claire's, whose job is to manage dead horse stock. He commented that he had never seen anything like it, and thought it had been done with a sharp blade. The horse was taken to Sutton Bonington campus, where a post-mortem was carried out the following day, on Tuesday the 8th of September. We know from talking to the pathologist who carried out the post-mortem, it was completed on Tuesday the 8th of September and included a CT scan. A copy of the report was given or sent to RSPCA Inspector Andy Bostock the same day. We know this because we telephoned the campus and spoke to the person who wrote the report. Because Claire had so much experience with horses, she knew how long a post-mortem would normally take, and expected to receive news from the post-mortem probably later that day, i.e. Tuesday the 8th of September, but heard nothing. After the post-mortem had been carried out, the dead stock manager who delivered the horse to the post-mortem rang Claire at 6 p.m. on Tuesday evening to say the guy who normally collects the animals and takes them to the incinerators from Sutton Bonington had collected all the other animals apart from Claire's horse. He said the only reasons he could think of for this was because there was something a bit odd, or they wanted to do further tests, or they needed the police or the RSPCA to come and take further pictures or evidence. But to reiterate, we know the post-mortem had been fully completed by that time. Claire asked for a copy of the report, but was not given one. That evening, Claire and some of her family watched one of my films about a very similar case we covered in 2010 from East Sussex. The similarities were striking.
It was bizarre because obviously I've never seen this type of injury before. You get fence wounds, lacerations, silly injuries, broken legs from herd behaviour, etc. But to see a horse that looked as though it had been attacked like mine did, and then to be shown footage of another horse of exactly the same age, exactly the same breed type, but blue as opposed to red, was a bit uncanny, really.
Claire's father, who was a hunting man, also watched the film and commented he thought it was medicinal or some sort of medical research. When they turned the horse over when the forensic woman was in attendance, there was no blood. Claire could hear air and bubbling around the tiny bit of pooling of blood, but no blood came out. She also pointed out how difficult it would normally be to catch this particular horse. Typically it would take an hour and a half because she was semi-wild. Also, it wasn't like her to go down to that bottom part of the field. She normally stayed at the other side of the field. There were also drag marks where you can see where she may have been dragged, and impressions where it looks like she has lain at different parts of the field. It's as if she was dragged around in the centre of the field, but where she was discovered there are no drag marks around her at all. Regarding the injuries, she said it just looked like someone was in a dissection class and took a scalpel to it. They slept on it on Tuesday night and assumed they would get more answers and a copy of the post-mortem report on Wednesday the 9th of September. Wednesday was the day I first made telephone contact with Claire, and she was clearly very puzzled why, by the end of the day, she was still not being given visibility of the report. She said the vets are trying to almost convince me that she just died of natural causes, and it is possible for a fox to have done it. A new development seemed to have occurred by Thursday morning, when there was large-scale media coverage of an alleged suspect. Newspapers reported that a 28-year-old man had been arrested in connection with the mutilation. Despite the very large media coverage, the man was soon released with no involvement in the crime. But the bizarre thing was, Claire had not even been informed of an arrest, and the police did not contact her to ask if she knew the 28-year-old. The first she heard of the arrest was by reading it in the media. So not only were they withholding the post-mortem report from the victim, they were also failing to report on a suspect they had arrested. I telephoned Claire again on the Thursday, and she said, "I spoke to the vets who were very cautious about telling me anything. They would give me very little information at all." Apparently they spoke to the police and the RSPCA yesterday, which was Wednesday, although nobody phoned me back. 2 people were apparently arrested last night, but I think they've been released. I have spoken to the RSPCA officer and insisted he tells me what he's been told. He's been told that the horse had acute pancreatitis. It's a 2-year-old. I work with horses for a living. I think in the whole history of working with horses, I've seen 3 horses with pancreatitis. They've all been quite old, and they've all had belly aching, rumbling symptoms for weeks or months.
Now, pancreatitis, as far as I'm aware, having spoken to various vets, is exceptionally rare in young horses. It's ordinarily seen in older animals, and to be honest, it's still very rare. It's still a very uncommon thing to get. It's more in cats and dogs than it is in horses. So the older horse, apparently, it's quite chronic as opposed to acute. Although obviously there's bound to be some acute cases. But for a fit, well, rising 2-year-old filly to just be perfectly fine one evening, have pancreatitis in the night, showing no signs whatsoever in the days or hours before, is something that I've never come across anyway, and the vets that I've spoken to have never come across. So the other thing I've been told is that the soft tissue around all the major organs were all swollen, very swollen, and they also told me that there was massive neck trauma. So because of that, they were going to speak to obviously have authorised the CT scan of the neck area, presumably because they don't want to cut the animal, you know, and they want to preserve it in some way. So until I get those results back, we won't have any further information.
This statement from Claire is very interesting. The RSPCA officer, who we assume is Andy Bostock, said they can't give a full report until probably next week because they want to do a CT scan. This contradicts information we were given by the college, that a CT scan had already been carried out and that Bostock already had a copy of the report. Let's just make a note of that, the reason why Claire could not be given the report. They were waiting for a CT scan. Claire then went on to say, "Now I've spoken to my friend the vet, who said in her career she's only ever come across 5 cases of pancreatitis and they've all been in older horses. She said the chances of a young fit 2-year-old coming down with pancreatitis and dying within a few hours is just like winning the lottery. She said that they may have given her something to induce that. They won't tell me whether they've found DNA or anything else. How could they possibly have found people and arrested them? The other thing is, I haven't been told about it, and the newspapers already know. The vet can't understand how the press knows about it when we don't." Claire was so annoyed she demanded to speak to the Chief Constable because she wanted to know why she had been left out. "It's my horse, I own it, I'm the victim. I don't expect things like that to happen without some sort of pre-warning. They can't give me any more results until next week. How long does it take to do a CT scan? They're obviously doing more than that." So Claire thought at this time that perhaps they were doing more tests. But we know now this is untrue, having spoken to the pathologist who did the post-mortem. Before we move on, let's just revisit the comment that there was massive trauma to the neck. This could be very significant and lines up with mutilation injuries from previous cases. After I received the images, I passed them on to David Cayton, who had a very close look at them. In his report, he gives his opinions and compares the injuries with the 2010 case, Rascal. I think it is possible that the 5-inch diameter hole about the right ear was cut primarily to facilitate extraction of a number of neck organs further down the neck. There are two closely spaced, deeper-looking cavities within this incision. Maybe the unknown organs have been withdrawn via these cavities. A bit like Rascal, but from a smaller, deep hole. This, I presume, could be the cause of the reported neck trauma, perhaps a convenient term for the organ's absence. Maybe this was seen, but not well by initial radiography, hence the claim that they wish to carry out CT scans. If true, it would suggest that they have not, as yet, surgically opened up the neck area in the vicinity of the open wound. I would have thought that a physical inspection would be cheaper than CT scans. Maybe they think it beneficial to examine non-destructively. A CT scan would perhaps prove to them that some advanced procedural method has been applied without the damaging open surgery of the PM. Like Rascal, the mouth, upper lip and muzzle wounds are similar, with the tongue still in place and intact. Maybe brain tissue has been taken via the mouth cavity or via the ear incision. Regarding the swelling of the anal and vulval orifices, I ponder whether it was necessary for them to have the bladder and lower intestines completely emptied for some reason. This might account for the discovery of patches of wet cowpat-type excreta and some solid lumps of darker coloured feces in the local proximity. Removal of an eye, sometimes both, is another mystery. Virtually total loss of blood volume is a very common modus operandi feature. Some blood pooling is, like Rascal, evident. Some organs will retain a small amount of blood even though the majority has been exsanguinated. I am aware of teat or the tips of teats having been excised on cows in other cases, but this on a female horse is a first for me. Have seen bits of hair cut neatly and cleanly before, but again, why is the big question. Just like the Rascal case, other horses in the field or nearby were very spooked. I agree totally with Claire's assessment that Honey had been dragged along her left side. I asked Claire to contact me when she got the report or when there were any further developments. I didn't hear anything for over a week when she telephoned me on Saturday the 19th of September, but not to tell me that she had the report, to tell me that another horse had been mutilated. She reported that it had just happened that afternoon to a similar horse to her horse owned by a friend just up the road. The ear had been cut and again the chestnuts removed. Before I go into detail on this second horse mutilation, I really wanted to know about the post-mortem report from the first mutilation. She said she had still not been given a copy because it was inconclusive. Claire said that her friend, who was a top surgical vet, had been in touch with them, and they told her that they can't do anything at all until the toxicity reports are back for the type of poison or whatever. So let's make a note of that reason as to why the report was still being withheld from the owner. We are waiting for toxicity reports. We'd already had, we are waiting for a CT scan. Anyway, let's come back to that and continue with the second mutilation. The horse was the same colour and the same age, but this time male. Claire put me in touch with the dead stock manager, and myself and David Cayton went to film the horse the following day on Sunday the 20th of September, before it was post-mortemed the following day. The injuries on this horse were certainly less severe than on the first. In fact, the injuries alone would not have caused the horse to die.
Horse like this is very unlikely, isn't it, really?
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are young animals that do just drop dead. Physical signs of any trauma. This around it, it's just come out since it's been, since it's gassed up inside.
It's been dragged.
It's been dragged.
I think it's been dragged along to the rocks in the rear.
So what are your immediate thoughts, David?
Well, I'd say these and the ear cuts are typical of our ET friends.
The chestnuts and the ear cut. I mean, it's not a lot to go on, is it? It's not. large injuries like rascal or... Then there's no obvious cause of death, because the chestnut removal and the ear would not cause it to die, so something's killed it.
No, that's like you said. It's interesting to know how the horse has been put down.
We know that this horse was also post-mortemed by the same college, and the post-mortem report given to RSPCA Inspector Andy Bostock around the 21st of September. Following this, I had no contact from Claire for another month. So on the 21st of October, we decided to ring the college, and David Cayton spoke directly to the person who had carried out the post-mortem. They told him that the RSPCA had been given the first report, including a CT scan, on the 8th of September, and that it is normal practice for the vet to share the results with the owner. And in this case, they assumed Claire had already received them. So the college assumed Claire already had been given a copy of the post-mortem report shortly after the 8th of September. It was now the 21st of October, and Claire still had no post-mortem report. I eventually got to speak to Claire again, only to be given further twists to the story. She said the post-mortem indicated poisoning. However, she was merely repeating what she had been told and still had no copy of the actual report in her possession. She also said that somebody had recently been arrested and was on police bail until the 5th of November. She said that until they release him or charge him, they have asked her not to say anything to anybody or broadcast the fact the second mutilation was done. She said apparently before all this happened, it did happen to another lady in the area, with chestnuts cut off, etc. She said after the 5th of November she will be able to give me more information and we can probably talk about it then. So we now have a third reason why Claire had not been given a copy of the post-mortem report. This time it was because somebody had been arrested. Strangely, unlike the arrest reported in the media on the 9th of September, this arrest was nowhere to be seen in the media. I decided to telephone Lincolnshire Police to ask if they were going to update their original press release, which was still up on their website. The officer checked the police computer system and stated in clear language that there had been no further arrests in connection with the Cayton horse. So was somebody arrested or not? At the time of making this piece, I can inform you that I received correspondence from Claire on the 12th of November stating that because no one was now being held responsible, they are going to send her a copy of the post-mortem report. She said it may take a few days in the post and her vet may get it first, but she will send me a copy. Another interesting point in all this is that Claire witnessed and filmed black helicopters hovering over the fields 2 to 3 weeks before the mutilations happened.
For a couple of weeks before the incident happened, we noticed, there was a few people actually that noticed there was black helicopters flying above these fields in this area, and they were kind of hovering. It was generally around 1-2 o'clock in an afternoon, and various people had obviously mentioned it.
The helicopters have never been seen since. Let's just summarise some of what we know. We know that RSPCA Inspector Andy Bostock is in possession of 2 post-mortem reports. We also know that somebody prevented one of these reports from being given to the horse owner. We know that there were 3 different reasons given on different dates as to why the owner could not be given the report. These were: we are waiting for a CT scan, even though a scan had already been done; we are waiting for toxicity reports; and we have a suspect, even though the police told me there was no suspect. We know that in normal circumstances, even if the horse had been murdered, there is no reason why the owner should not be given a copy of the report. The pathologist who did the post-mortem thought the owner should have been given the report. We also know that from David Cayton's comments that many of the injuries follow the classic pattern of animal mutilation cases documented all over the world. We know that black helicopters were witnessed a few weeks before the incident. We also know that nobody has been charged with the offence of murdering these horses. Does this all point to a cover-up on animal mutilation in the UK? And just who is Andy Bostock really working for? Does he have links to DEFRA and possibly the security services? I've obviously mentioned the main injuries in the documentary, but just give us your overall impression of the first case.
Yes, I mean, there's a fairly neat, roughly 5 or 6 inch diameter hole on the left side of the neck. And then within that area of flesh and skin and hide removal, there seems to be 2 smaller holes within that bigger hole. And since the horse went for post-mortem at Sutton Bonington campus, which is a veterinary training college, they were reporting that there was internal trauma to the neck. So they obviously did initial x-rays, and that definition is perhaps not so good, so they decided they would go to the expense of a CT scan to try and find out, without opening the neck up, I imagine initially, to see what had happened in that area, which was swollen slightly, I think they were reporting. And we're still awaiting the post-mortem reports on that.
We've done as much as we can to investigate the case, and really the icing on the cake will be the post-mortem report, which would say whether organs have been are missing and whether blood has been removed and this kind of thing.
And the cause of death is the big mystery. What's put the horse down in the first place? In fact, all 3 of them, or certainly 2 of them we know of.
Now, as usual, we haven't managed to get a copy of the post-mortem report, which is exactly what happened in the 2010 case, even though we were promised one. The pathologist said that she would have expected the horse owner to be given a copy of that straight away.
Yes.
Yeah. It seems to us that they may have fed the horse owner a line that they've got some on investigation in order to prevent her from giving us further information.
They have apparently confided in her that there's some poisoning aspect of it taking place, inferring that the horse was poisoned by a person, a suspect. I think the RSPCA inspector, and their job is to work with the police to get evidence to find a culprit and get a successful prosecution. That's one of their roles when there's been an animal attack. So I think he's the man, he's the key man who's calling the shots on this and directing how it goes. So I think the police have, in all innocence, have issued what is correct from their point of view, as is the pathologist, so that it looks like the person who's blocking the information to clear the horse owner and us, or anybody else for that matter, is the RSPCA. When you consider that as a public funded body, you know, and they're not as though they've got the restraints of the police service upon them, I find it's a bit almost discrediting the role of the RSPCA to act as judge and jury sort of thing in these cases.
Now, let's just discuss some of the evidence, David. I'm going to put this diagram up on the screen, which I think in some of these animal mutilation cases, this is possibly what's going on. Not specifically anti-lymphocyte globulin, but I just want to put this up on the screen to show people what animals are used for by our own medical practice. Right? Horses are used to create antibodies, and which are given to organ transplant patients to stop them rejecting the organs. So one example is anti-lymphocyte globulin. So what they do is they take lymph nodes from the spleen or thymus, and they create washed white cells, and they actually inject them into a horse. That horse then produces globulin is then extracted from the horse serum. It's put in a vial and it's injected. It's used to inject into humans. I'm just going to read this section from Wikipedia on it. It says that ALG, anti-lymphocyte globulin, is an infusion of animal antibodies against human T cells, which is used in the treatment of acute rejection in organ transplantation. It was developed in the 1960s, during which time 74 scientific papers were published on its use. Experimental preparations were first used in the Stanford laboratories in heart transplantation, and commercial preparations have been available since the 1970s. It has also been used in the treatment of aplastic anemia. It is less commonly used than the similar anti-thymocyte globulin, and like ATG, it is associated with cytokine release syndrome in the short term and an increased risk of post-transplant lymphoproliferative disorder in the long term. ALG is more likely to cause side effects than ATG, but is safer than OKT3, etc. One notable source of ALG was a horse called Volcano, who lived in South America. At one point in the mid-1990s, the world's entire supply of ALG came from this horse. So this technique of creating antibodies in horses can be used to create presumably thousands of doses, right? So you're using the anatomy of an animal to create antibodies for human beings. So it seems that it's the blood and soft tissue organs where antibodies reside that are taken in these cases. So could it not be something similar? That this horse has been injected with something a few weeks previous and it's been harvested to take whatever whatever those who took it need, that they're using for some, perhaps not ALG, but something similar. Because there are other animals that they grow antibodies in, sheep, rabbits, which we both know are get mutilated.
So it could be that they've got hybrid human beings out there that have been abducted and are messing around with genetically, who are suffering sort of the same effects of organ rejection, or the alien species have got problems of their own which is similar to ours, so their own manipulation, of tinkering with their development and DNAs, etc. So they need to use our earthbound animals to put their own antibodies in, and then they harvest them later, which could account for lots of the mutilations. So
if it is,
you could argue from their point of view, is for a good reason. Hard luck for us, but
if it is not human beings that are responsible for this, but it's some other intelligent species, how are we going to know what their needs are in terms of medicine? They might have organs similar to us, or they might have hybridized. They're living on our planet. Maybe they're from other dimensions or worlds or what have you. So they just as human beings who transplant organs require something which can be made inside a horse, so other intelligent species may also require something that's made inside another animal.
It might be to combat some disease that we get. I mean, we get problems abroad, don't we? Malaria and all these diseases, which people have to be treated for and jabbed up for. So maybe coming to planet Earth gives them problems. So they need something to counteract these adverse problems.
And they may need a constant supply all the time, which would account for the
continued animal taking.
And all right, let's come on to another part of the mutilation, David, because in the case in East Sussex, the horse had its chestnuts removed. These are these small callus-like lumps on its legs. All four cleanly excised, as we saw in the video, and with Rascal. We've really scratching our heads over this. We can't understand why anyone would remove them. And you've got two cases 5 years apart, a few hundred miles apart, or however far it is from East Sussex to Leicestershire, with the same, exactly the same four chestnuts excised. So that's three cases that we know of.
All four.
And we just can't come up with any suggestion as to why they would do that. I mean, I suggested that maybe the animal's clamped and the chestnuts get in the way of the clamping mechanism. But
I think there would be marks of clamps if that was the case.
You thought that they've maybe put some sort of monitoring implant in that part of its body because it's redundant, and then they remove it to take the implant away.
And that implant would not interfere with the bloodstream of the animal, perhaps, because it's a obsolescent.
It might not get rejected. Inside a chestnut. Because it's redundant. Maybe. We're hypothesizing, folks. We don't know. But anyone who has any thoughts on it,
we'd love to know.
We would.
Yes, so professional opinions would be very gratefully received.
Yeah.
And why would they often take ears or portions of ear, as in the case that they have with honey in Leicestershire in the beginning of September? And again, you get a double cut line where they've taken a cut lower down to remove the outer hide, and then a higher cut, and exposing the gristle, the tissue of the ear, before severing the ear at an angle, an inch or so from the base.
Right.
And they've taken mane hair, samples of mane hair. It's baffling completely. You know, why would they do that? What purpose?
Yeah, and I think Claire Watts actually said that in her horse that had the 4 chestnuts removed, on one of the legs it looked as though some blood had come out from where the chestnut was excised, and it had dripped down the leg, but only so far, and it had stopped. So she concluded from that that the horse must have been standing when the chestnuts were cut off for a period of time, and at which point it then wasn't standing, because it only came down so far.
Yeah, or she thinks it might have been suspended with straps around the inner legs. It was like a hoist, a harness of some sort. Right. So it might have been just off the ground, with the legs dangling below, for a period anyway.
Absolutely mind-boggling.
And also, she said the jugular vein on the second horse on the neck were distended, which might suggest
bulging.
Yeah, they might suggest that they've been taking blood from there or whatever.
Yeah, well, this is the thing we don't know, because
we've not seen the post-mortem. No.
They don't. But that would be interesting to know. All right, and David, well, thanks for joining me today to discuss this case. It's as you say, it's baffling. But if any viewer has any expertise or any comments, please email me at richard@richplanet.net. But until then, thanks very much, David.
Pleasure. Okay. I hope something develops that we can
bottom
this case.
Yeah.
Or cases.
And believe none of what you hear and only half of what you see. I'm Richard D. Hall. Good night. 2 miles apart. Yeah. One on the 7th of September, one a couple of weeks later, and we actually went to the second one. So we filmed there. David took some high definition images of the second case, which didn't have as many of the classic injuries, but some of them on the second horse. Yeah. So let's talk about the first horse, David, Honey, from a place called Cayton in Leicestershire. Now, I found out about this case because somebody emailed me a story from the Leicester Mercury, I think it's called. Leicester Mercury, yeah. I then went on Facebook to try and track down the owner of the horse, which I managed to do, and then somebody passed the phone number on, so I telephoned the owner, and then I had several lengthy discussions with the horse owner. This is Claire Watts. We're going to discuss some very intriguing elements of this case, David, because it sort of had some twists and turns in it.
Yes.
So yeah, it's some of the classic injuries, and I've made a short documentary which features the horse owner Claire, because she very kindly allowed us into the field 2 weeks after her horse was mutilated. We went down to film the second mutilated horse, and we interviewed Claire in the field where her horse turned up. Yeah. So I'm just going to screen a short documentary that I've made following our investigation into this case. Mutilation incidents where these seals were turning up with bizarre spiral cuts on their body, and it is still unexplained, and we are going to cover that in another show. Yeah. And also animal mutilation cases. Tell us about the UFO Truth Conference in Holmfirth, September 19th. September the 19th, 2015.
Suddenly I'm being presented with a
Let's have a look at it then, David.
An award for survival.
which is a chunk of glass.
Yep, that's it.
Very good.
Which is very nicely done.
So read out what it says.
It says, UFO Truth magazine proudly presents David Cayton, UK, with a UK award for services to British ufology. So that was I was really thrilled to bits to get this. I mean, it was a complete surprise.
Right. So, all right, we'll put it there.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't fall over. Right. All right. Great. Well done. Congratulations.
So
well deserved, I think.
Yes, it's a very nice, acknowledgement of my efforts for 20 odd years. So
right, and we'll come on to that because David and I have been looking into another horse mutilation case. Now, you may remember back in 2010, we made a film called Silent Killers in Sussex, which followed the tragic mutilation of a horse called Rascal in East Sussex. Was it, David?
yes.
Since then, there's been probably at least half a dozen, if not more, maybe double figures, horse mutilation cases like that one in the UK.
Yeah.
Do you want to name some of the areas, David?
Yeah, well, 2012, there seemed to be a spate of them a bit. So we're working from south to north. There was one in Cornwall, across the Bristol Channel in Carmarthenshire, and West Wales, in Pembrokeshire area, and then up in Scotland. I think that's it. I think
right. But
yes,
but we seem to have had a spate of attacks in the latter part of 2015. Now there are 5 cases that we know of. There may be more. 2 in Scotland, 1 in August, 1 in October, we believe, but there were 3 in Leicestershire.
Yes.
The first taking place, I think, on the 7th of September 2015 in Leicestershire, and then another one followed about a fortnight after that. And when we think there might be a third one, but we haven't got that corroborated, have we?
Not yet. No.
We think the third one may be either before the first one. We're not sure, right? But there's definitely 2.
And they were just 2 miles apart.
Welcome to RichPlanet TV. I'm Richard D. Hall. I'd like to welcome back onto the show veteran UFO researcher David Cayton. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Richard. I'm very pleased to be here.
Now then, last time you were on, we spoke about your unfortunate heart attacks, three in a row. How are you recovering from that at the moment?
Yeah, pretty well, thank you. Yes, it was March the 8th last year, and then in the first 45 minutes I had 3 cardiac arrests. So thanks to the North West Ambulance Service and Manchester Royal Infirmary, where I was on a trolley waiting to have a stent put in to unblock the blocked artery, they jumped me again, and I'm here to tell the tale and participate in what we're doing.
Right.
Now, that, and be with my family, of course.
Yes.
Right.
Now, it sort of obviously was a setback for some of the things you were looking into. You were looking into the mysterious seal mutilation. The story starts with media reports published on Tuesday the 8th of September of a barbaric blade attack on a horse in Cayton, Leicestershire. The reports claimed the incident is believed to have happened sometime between 6:15 p.m. on Sunday the 6th and 10:30 a.m. on Monday the 7th of September. The mainstream articles did not give particularly detailed descriptions of the injuries, stating it was done with a very sharp implement of some sort. The horse's right ear and some of the right side of her face was cut off. After studying the articles, it looked like a classic animal mutilation case, exhibiting some of the typical characteristics we have seen many times. I put some feelers out on social media to try and make contact with the horse owner, which I was able to do. I managed to make telephone contact with the owner on Wednesday the 9th of September, just 2 days after the attack. Since this date, I have been in regular contact with her by email and by phone and have received a lot of information as events have transpired. There are two broad aspects to the story I want to cover. Firstly, the physical and circumstantial evidence which point to something very unusual and closely match previous unexplained animal mutilation cases. Secondly, what seems to be blatant attempts by authorities to cover up detailed information about the injuries from the horse owner. The owner is someone with 20 years' experience in handling horses, who has between